Greetings and welcome back. We'll begin chapter 6 this week. And if you've noticed, take a look at a world map, you'll notice that we've been making our way east, gradually making our way east. Today we began to take a turn south before taking a turn west next week. We've been covering areas that are of international interest thus far, since many of these countries have been in the news that we've covered, or these regions rather, and not so much where we're traveling this week, for perhaps the exception of Vietnam, and I'm talking about Southeast Asia. So you're going to turn to page 246 in your textbooks. It'll probably be very helpful. I debated about how to employ the maps in this section, as it is a region that Americans are not as familiar with. And instead of resorting to maps on the screen share, I'm kind of rolling the dice and sticking with the textbook maps. And the benefit there is that they're clearer maps. They're clearer maps than what is on the internet. The drawback, I can't use a pointer, but I think I can direct you to the correct spots. Take a look at where we're going. In this particular section. There we go. Just one more time. Chapter 6, Southeast Asia, some of the major heads-up terms. The domino theory. The domino theory, this was the idea the Americans had during the Cold War, that if one nation fell to communism, the whole region would or could fall. And again, the major impetus for our involvement in Vietnam. Indigenous groups, going to mention that briefly. Indigenous groups, these are folks that are native to the nation and the culture. ASEAN, this is the Association of Southern Nations to Stop Communism. Indochina, you would have heard this a lot in reference to Vietnam during the Vietnam War. And so we'll certainly be talking about that. The boat people, these are Vietnamese who fled Vietnam once the communists took over South Vietnam in 1975. Over a particular period of time, many risked life and limb to make it out of Vietnam and go to some of the other regional nations. The Khmer Rouge, the communists of Cambodia, and they ruled between 1975 and 1979 under a man named Pol Pot. Jamaat Islamiyah, I'm not going to cover that, but since they're up here, and for your information, a radical Muslim extremist group out of Indonesia. The Green Revolution, I'm going to dwell on that a little bit. The Green Revolution, this is new mechanization and irrigation practices to raise farming productions, and then paddy, this is rice cultivation. Particular objectives for this particular chapter: we want to generalize the region's cultural history, examine the pros or cons of communism on the region, and then we want to break down the region's global ties. Get that S out of there. All right, break down the region's global ties. Let's take a look, dive into the lecture model here, a world of influences, right? Southeast Asia, world of influences. You can turn to page 246 on your in your textbook, and take a look at the regional map there as I play tour guide as well. Check that out there. Okay. World of influences to combat the U.S. fear of a domino theory, which is the spread of communism, as a policy of containment, and that was to stop the spread of communism. ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, was established. A cultural history and colonization. The Khmer, the Burmese, Thai, and Vietnamese empires, the oldest empires in the region. The Hmong people, the Khmer people, they occupied present-day Cambodia, the center of the Khmer Empire, uh, roughly 800 AD to 1200 AD. Red River Valley in the north became the center of the Vietnamese kingdom by the 1st century BC. Burma, which becomes Myanmar, became Buddhist via Sri Lankan monks. We will see Sri Lanka next week when we get to South Asia, so we're close to India. A cultural intersection. Southeast Asia is a cultural intersection. The Muslims arrive 1200s AD. They establish Malaysia, Indonesia, and Indonesia is the world's largest Islamic state. And that sounds like a good quiz question, by the way. Let's just back up and look at where some of these countries are on page 246. I had mentioned Cambodia. If you take a look at your map on page 246, you can see China, top, I guess, center left part of the page, and drop down, you'll see Vietnam just south of that, and then just southwest of that is Cambodia. And then just talked about Myanmar and Burma. And if you take a look at the very northwest end of the region we're studying, you will see Myanmar, formerly Burma. And then I had talked about Malaysia and Indonesia. Malaysia, if you find Thailand just southeast of Myanmar and Burma, and you'll see the isthmus that drops down to goes all the way down to a peninsula. In between Thailand and the peninsula is Malaysia. And I might as well mention Singapore too, since we're going to get there here very shortly. Singapore is at the very tip of that peninsula. So there's your isthmus, and here's the peninsula. There's Malaysia right in this particular area. And Indonesia, if you drop down beyond Singapore, you will see on the other side of the strait, you will see a chain of islands, and you'll see Jakarta on that chain of islands all the way across to East Timor. That is what makes the makeup of Indonesia. Okay. Now the colonists and independents. The colonists and independents. Philippines. Take a look at the Philippines first. And again, let's take a look at the map before I do that. And you can see China again and Taiwan, and just drop down south of that. Right, in the Philippine Sea, you can see the Philippines and the Philippine Islands. The Spanish introduced the Roman Catholic faith to the Philippines, and it's the only largely Christian nation in the region. Philippines were once, and this is a result of being a former Spanish colony. Philippines were a Spanish colony until the end of the 1800s. At that juncture, it became an American jurisdiction after the U.S. victory in the Spanish-American War over the Spanish. Indonesia, again, you know, dropping down below Singapore, that island, entire island chain there stretches out in the Indian Ocean all the way over to East Timor. The Dutch were colonial rulers after fighting among colonial powers. The headquarters was in modern day Jakarta, and you could see on the island chain there, if you look, not too hard to find Jakarta. Headquarters was in modern day Jakarta via the Dutch East India Company, roughly around the late 1500s. The Dutch granted Indonesia their independence in 1950. Malaysia and Singapore. Malaysia and Singapore. The British brought Tamil Indians and Chinese laborers to work Malaysia rubber plantations and tin mines. Singapore, again, at the peninsula there, they actually withdrew from the Federation of Malaysia in 1965 as a result of its Chinese identity not being maintained among their Malaysian majority. And then going up again to the northeastern corner of our region, take a look at Myanmar, right? Formerly Burma, initially a British colony. Millions of Indians came to man commercial industry. Indochina, the area of Vietnam. The area of Vietnam, just go east across that sub-region up there from Myanmar over to the South China Sea, and you can see Vietnam. The war ended between the U.S. and the North Vietnamese with the Communist North victorious. Country was reunified under communist rule in 1975. Shortly, I will be discussing some of the videos I want you to watch, and going to kind of be dwelling on that time period, 1970, post 1975 American involvement in the region. Thailand again, we're in that sub-region there in the northwestern part of the region, of the southeastern region, or Southeast Asia region, and you can see in between Vietnam and Myanmar, the nation of Thailand, the nation of Thailand. And with Thailand, this is really the only country in the region that did not become a European colony. Sounds like a good quiz question too, by the way. And then you have your Pacific Islands, the Pacific Islands, in between Indonesia, Brunei, and Papua New Guinea. You can see those island nations. The United Kingdom, the UK, was the first colonizer of the region. We'll say a few things on the geography of the region. The region's climates are largely tropical and heavily influenced by oceanic influences. The most, very moist subtropical mid-latitude climates are found at the region's northern and southern extremes. If you look at your maps. Mainland Southeast Asia contains many large sediment-laden rivers. This region is home to a wide variety of animal and vegetation types, numerous mountain ranges, and volcanoes are found in the region. The result of movement of three major and one minor tectonic plate. Earthquakes are common in the region. And over on page 251, you can see a visual of those where those major plates are. So yeah, as a result, earthquakes are happen unfortunately frequently there. Um, one of the most one of the probably most massive of all the seismic activities in my lifetime occurred the day after Christmas, December 26th, 2004, with the Indian Ocean tsunami, which reached from, I think it started in Sumatra, just off the coast of Indonesia, and actually reverberated over all the way over to Africa. It was so cataclysmic. So there you have that. Some of the detailed geographic features and after effects. Let's move now to globalization and local change. Economic links created during the colonial era between Southwest Asia and uh, and the rest of the world kind of laid the foundations of for current conditions, or Southeast Asia, I'm sorry. The global conditions, though, should probably add this too. The global conditions created by the island nations that we just looked at of the South Pacific, they were fewer. They were fewer. The impact was not as lasting. And when we get to Australia, New Zealand, and the island nations, more specifically, we're going to see too that interaction between New Zealand and Australia with the wider world was early and often, but again, the island nations lag behind in that regard. Page 256, figure 6.8 is that chart that you guys know I love, and gives you a capsule view of how many people out of 1,000 in Singapore own automobiles, in Thailand, Vietnam. Vietnam, 13 folks in Vietnam out of 1,000 own an automobile, according to that chart. I only highlight that now because, again, with some of the short videos I want you to watch, we're going to be dwelling on post 1975 Vietnam after the Americans left. So you can see right there as a forecast, things are probably not that good. Population dynamics. Turn to page 257, figure 6.9, and you'll see a population distribution map there. And keep one eye on that as we work our way through this section. Urbanization under communism. Deurbanization. Communists dealt with overcrowding in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, by setting up economic zones, which meant directing Vietnamese families back to their village. And let me just turn your attention, got you guys jumping back and forth here. Back on page 246, if you're interested, Ho Chi Minh City is on that map. Ho Chi Minh City is of historical importance because that was part of South Vietnam, the half of the peninsula that the Americans were defending. It was quasi-democratic and free markets, right? It wasn't communist. But Ho Chi Minh City used to be Saigon. And then once the Americans left in 75, communists took over South Vietnam. They changed it to their legendary military leader of the North Viet Cong, military fighting forces Ho Chi Minh. So they renamed it Ho Chi Minh City. Just a historical FYI there for you. Chinese business people, though, Chinese business people fled from the persecution. Again, once the communists took over, just like Mao did in China, just like Stalin did in the Soviet Union, the capitalists were the targets, right, for the communists. And the Chinese business people who were capitalists were being persecuted and fled from 1977 through 1982, otherwise known as the boat people. Right? You will see a very interesting clip that I have for you in your video of the actual footage of hundreds of people on rafts on their way, making it to one of the shores of Malaysia. Geographic identity. Chinese make up about 7% of the population of the entire region. So the ethnic variety, Chinese communities are evident in the entire region. Human rights. The Khmer Rouge ruled Cambodia from 1975 to 1979. And again, like we just saw this just up north in China, uh, more atrocities, right? With just horrible government. 1.7 million people died from starvation, disease, or execution from at the hands of the Khmer Rouge under Pol Pot. Thing about this is, I'll just add this too. Getting back to the domino theory, we were concerned about the dominoes of Vietnam falling, the domino of Vietnam falling, and then the rest of the region going down with it. Cambodia, Cambodia was communist, and you know so was Laos, and Vietnam after the communists took over began to have border wars with the Chinese, right? The communist Chinese and their Mao. So what I'm getting at here, and in my Vietnam course I teach this, that the dominoes didn't really fall. The dominoes began to rub against each other. The communists just fought each other after after the Americans left, and also some really horrible governments. King Sihanouk, to his credit, created a tribunal to put those leaders on trial in 2001. And you don't have to write this down. I'll just, again, as another FYI, I will add this, that these trials didn't begin until, I think it was 2007. And they were United Nations led. Um, and most of the problem was, by that time, most of the Khmer Rouge leaders were dead, or they were in the process of dying. As of, I think it was 2012, 90% sure of that. Only two of the top leaders were alive. Okay, but they were put in prison. Lastly, take a look at the mainland countries here. Turn to page 264 and a more concentrated map of these countries. The mainland countries of Myanmar, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. Military and communist governments have kept the area aloof from world trade, and then the internal conflicts. Late 90s, there was an economic crisis in coming out of Indonesia. the Suharto government, the Suharto family. There was a lot of overlending and subsequent government corruption, probably the epicenter of the problem. And then you had 1999, after years of Portuguese and Indonesian occupation, East Timor, with UN assistance, gained their independence. And you could see um, at the bottom of the map there on page 264, you can see just to the east of the island chain of Indonesia, you can see East Timor. Then you have Brunei. Brunei, you can see Brunei just north of the Indonesian island chain and um, southwest of the Philippines and southeast of these mainland countries, Brunei and Borneo. Brunei, the north coast and the north coast of Borneo. Interesting thing happened there. They struck it rich in oil and natural gas. They gained their independence from Great Britain rather late, 1984. Kind of getting into the finishing up on the economic crisis, overlending by banks in the late 90s, as I touched on, set off a financial crisis in the region. And that was a true domino effect there that we were concerned about here in the West that was going to affect us. And it barely had a ripple effect on the world economy, but in Southeast Asia, um, the government corruption and mismanagement out of Indonesia certainly had some negative effects on this particular region. And then lastly, farming changes in Southeast Asia. The Green Revolution. The Green Revolution began in the mid 1960s. And there was a combination of new mechanization and irrigation practices to raise production. And you don't have to write this down again. Just some FYI here for you. This was kicked off by genetic modification U.S. food scientists in Mexico, and actually it was early as the 1940s. And the aim was, and this worked actually under the quote unquote Green Revolution. They wanted higher yields in seeds, and with the with the seeds and the modification there, you had uh, a doubling of wheat production, rice, paddy, and corn. From 1969 to 1989, yeah, your rice yields certainly doubled with the new technology. So, i.e., it worked. If you have your graphic organizer, we will quickly recap and then talk about what's up ahead. Talk today, Southeast Asia. We talked about the influences, the domino theory, right? The fear of communism spreading, right? ASEAN was set up. We talked about the earliest empires there, the Khmer, Burmese, Thai, and the Vietnamese empires. The Muslims arrived 1200 AD in Malaysia and Indonesia. And then your European colonies, right? You have colonizers. The Spanish were in the Philippines, the Dutch were in Indonesia, the French were in Indochina / Vietnam, and the British Myanmar, formerly Burma. Thailand, not affected, not colonized. The mainland countries, Myanmar, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. Communism and militarism has hindered growth in all but Thailand. Then you have your island countries. The 90s economic crisis on Indonesia. There's been oil and gas found on Brunei and Borneo. And the Green Revolution applied there with a lot of success. Population dynamics. You have your economic zones set up in Vietnam to curb population problems. And then the awful persecutions in Vietnam, resulting in the boat people ethnic Chinese business people fleeing from 77 to 82. 75,000 left the country during that time period. Cambodia, you had the Khmer Rouge. Vietnamese and suspected sympathizers were tortured. 1.7 million people died between 1975 and 1979. All right, let's take a look at what is up ahead. The videos, got some videos again. Boat people, I mentioned that. Very interesting 4 or 5 minute clip on the actual footage of boat people. CBS News correspondent Ed Bradley of 60 Minutes is there to cover it. And then a couple of short videos on Vietnam and its aftermath, because your discussion question is going to deal with this. It's going to deal with this to some degree. Comprehension, analysis, practice activity, right? For you kinesthetic learners, right, who learn by doing, probably need to, and at this juncture, if you're not getting good quiz scores and you have not been looking at these, I would advise that you take the medicine, right? You take the medicine. It will do you some good. In the news, due Thursday night, of course. Again, feedback Thursday night. Let me know if you want to Zoom and talk about some things and get some feedback on some of maybe the practice activity. Discussion post, your first discussion post on Friday night, and then your responses due Sunday night. Quiz on Monday, and then we begin chapter 7. We're going to be taking a look at South Asia. Okay, and then I think somewhere in there we have our fall break. So schedule, and I'll get to that when we get there. The schedule for the assignments will change a little bit, but we'll worry about that then. Okay. All right. Any questions or comments? You guys know where to how to get a hold of me. And until then, you guys have a great week. Do well on everything, and I will talk to you next time.